Thank you. My name is Jay Wertzberger. I'm the founder of ATI Auto Business. I do want to thank Used Car Week Cherokee Media. Thank you all so much for joining us. You can hear me okay, mic check? I like to say that at the beginning of my shows, I go live every week. But today what we're doing is, I'm no stranger to controversy because I believe in open communication, situational understanding, context, and insight. So with me here on stage today is Renee Low, Bryan Russell, Vaughn Clemmons, Dave Sutton, and Jordan Sawalqah. We're here to continue to make you think. We hope that you're here to help us find new solutions because the auto recovery system is complicated and full of friction, with many business verticals playing roles in the same space, grinding gears, and for the 10,000-foot view of the grinding of those gears, please help me wish a warm welcome to Renee Low, Harding Brooks Insurance Agency. Thanks, everybody.
Good morning, everyone. Last year, we noticed that during the life cycle of a repossession, there was oftentimes grinding of gears, and sometimes the gears just halted. When that happened, that caused a delay in getting the repossessed vehicle from the storage lot, transported to auction, and sold. We want to discuss ways that communication can be improved, understanding can grow, so that doesn't happen. We want those gears to move freely.
So we're going to share some micros just from the industry right now. So 2024, 2.8 million units recovered, projected next year to increase to 3. About 70% of those units are going to be sold at auction. That's different for each finance company. Some are more or less, but on average. So you're talking of the 2.8, about 2 million are going to go to auction to sell. So that's really, we'll talk about that in a minute, but the friction points there. There's about 1,000 repo yards or repossession companies. That's qualified for companies that are picking up about 100 units or more each month. So I think RDN put out some numbers. It was around 1,300. That was a different qualifier, about 10 units a month. But there's about 1,000 repo yards there. There's 10,000 transportation service providers. How many are qualified? We'll talk about that in a second. There's also 1,000 auctions where the units are sold. So you can see there's so many point A's and point B's in this mix. We got to figure out how to tie it all together. But turn it over to Jordan for some trends as well.
Yeah, so some of the trends we're seeing right now on the repossession side of the house is unique VINs. Unique VINs are coming in and out of RDN several times. So you take that unique VIN, you scale it by thousands of VINs, you see repo volume higher, but recovery percentages are actually lower. And then the desire for agents to move their own transports. During COVID, it's no surprise that repo volume was really, really low. And some of the stuff I'm going to talk about a little bit later is some of the legacy software issues. So if agents have the ability to move their car, what ideally that looks like, if it's a direct or indirect relationship with the lender, hey, I have a blanket key approval. On day 2, I'm allowed to cut the key, and with 7 to 10 days, I have that unit at auto auction. I think that would smooth out a lot of the problems that we're seeing with getting cars to auction post-recovery. So
just from the auto finance seat, so my name is Bryan Russell. I'm at GM Financial, vendor management at GM Financial. But some of the challenges that the finance space, and this is not an exhaustive list, right? Like everyone has their own pain points. But a few things that have come up. We had a real good focus in 24 on post-repo. So we saw some competing timelines, obviously, the collection groups versus the remarketing groups. The repo agent wants it gone, the collection. It's just this tug of war that's happening, and the car's caught in the middle, right? All these competing timelines are hitting each other. But, from the lending side, we're not in the repo business, believe it or not. Shock, right? But it's the account resolution there and identifying what the customer's intent is. with that unit as fast as possible. Sometimes that drags on, sometimes, we know pretty quick. But that is like that key one of giving the green light for that unit to move. So we are also navigating some regulatory obligations there, reinstatements and, mandatory reinstatements in some states. But it's just identifying that account resolution before we move to, the remarketing phases of that. So the proximity locations of the repo agents, versus the auctions. So we have, about 800 or 900 repo lots out of our network today. And we have 40 auctions, right? So, some states we pull all the inventory out of that state and move it to a different state. So that has impacts on the account resolution piece. Is that customer going to drive 200 or 300 miles to pick that up? And then the distance too, and the expenses related. If you move it too soon, how do you get it back? There's expenses related to that. The visibility. One thing that we identified this year is all the groups were, using different metrics to measure how successful and how fast they were moving these units. So, the remarketing side and the collection side had two different definitions, and we aligned there, and that created a lot of good synergies, and we were able to cross the miles better this year, work together. I think, some of the strategies and standards in the space. And the sole sourcing right now, we're sole sourcing with the auction, but I think you have to rethink some of the strategy, right? It's time to rethink and maybe rebuild the wheel. Can we offer agent transport? That's something we're looking at. Can you introduce a third-party transportation provider? Some of the legacy systems are barriers to some of that, right? Like it's always been point A or point B, the agent or the auction. To introduce a middleman, it starts to break down when you look at the technologies and how those systems were built. But I think, and one thing that we're working with, shout out to RDN in the room. One thing we're working with them is on the post-repo life cycle. We're concentrating on the redemption holds and giving a better indicator in the tool right now. But, these systems that are in place today have great life cycles up to the point of repossession. And after repossession, there really is no life cycle. It just lives in a repossessed state. There's some fields they're using to track that, but if there was a more defined, like everyone can trust the life cycle up to the point of repo. How can we build or rethink a life cycle post-repo? CR, pictures, personal property, cutting the key, ready to transport, that kind of thing, where the client can interact as well. And then one last point is indicators. Better indicators in the system and a better story coming out of RDN or whatever tool you're using to, to tell the story. Does it have keys? Does it run? Is it in-op? So there are some technology challenges, that we face. But.
I'm Vaughn Clemmons. I'm the president of Automobile Recovery Bureau in Houston, and I'm going to speak more in lines of from the agents, the repossession agents' perspective. So we all know that there's a safety issue when you're out in the field with our agents picking up, securing vehicles or being shot at, et cetera, et cetera. But there's also now becoming a problem at the lot, not just securing the vehicles, but security for the agents themselves. We have agents being shot while on their lot, fights are breaking out on their lot. So security is a necessity. And one of the things I like to say is there's a lot of times when we look back at what we haven't done in this space, and that's because we really don't talk about these problems enough. So I know that most folks don't want to talk about money, but that's all I seem to talk about here lately. So when you go into the space part of this, it kind of equates to storage. Too long, the clients in this room have been dependent upon free storage. That requires a lot from the agent because there's a lot that is entailed when you're talking about giving something away for free. There's people on the lot that are performing tasks and they're being paid for these tasks, but the agents are not being paid for that. But these cars are sitting on lots for days and days and sometimes months on end for no cost to the agent. That's becoming a problem that we need to start talking about. And the purpose of this round table, so to speak, is to show you guys all the problems. Later we'll look at some of the solutions to these, but these are problems that we're facing right now. And storage has been for the last several years, and it remains. We also, for free, we accommodate consumers. So we have to take care of the personal property. We have to take care of vehicle redemptions. That requires a lot to be manned. There's hours that are required. So you look at an agent and you go, well, why haven't you released this car and it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon? Well, that's because there's no one there to provide any service. There's costs attached to providing service. And that's one of the things that we're going to talk about later, maybe on tomorrow. But we have to focus on how do we compensate for services that are being performed. Revenue, we're talking about the investment that we have to do at these lots. The costs for storage lots are insane. A spot at my lot in Houston is about $5.35 per slot. So if I'm giving these slots away for free, I'm losing money, and there's no way to make this up. John gave a really good presentation yesterday where he broke down how we have become more of a cost center for ourselves, and there is no profit being made at our lot. So we have to venture into how do we create revenue for the services that we're providing, where it becomes a profit. And then there's keys. While that car is on our lot, we're expected to make sure that car runs. We're expected to make sure that it's available to a transporter. When they get there, the battery, of course, needs to be jumped. With the electrical cars out now, we have to make sure that we store those in a safe environment. And then you have transporters that are showing up at the lot with the wrong equipment. No matter what you do, we can't do from the storage lot, we cannot provide free service to a transporter that shows up with inadequate equipment. For example, you bring an 18-wheeler to pick up a car with no keys. And then the transporter goes, well, why won't you help me load this? We can't. There's no revenue being generated for that. And then, and I can go on and on about that, but for time's sake, I'll move into the damage, which is one of the things that we're really focusing on now. With the loss that's going on out in the Carolinas, experiencing all the loss that have occurred this past year in Florida, we need to really go back to our contracts and insert language like force majeure. We need to add that in there so there is no way that a client expects us to pay for something we have no control over. That's happening in this space right now. Direct primary insurance is a problem for us. That's because we're paying for services, we're paying for insurance that we're not getting any revenue from. And that's an issue that we have to make transparent and we have to communicate. And I know that we already jumped into the acts of God, but I want to make sure the room understands this. If we do something, if we leave our lot wide open, if we park our car, one of your vehicles underneath a tree, and we know the tree is about to fall, we should pay for that. But if we secure our property, we lock up all the cars, and someone comes in and steals a car off our lot, that's not our fault. If a tornado comes through and tears up the city, that's not our fault. So we have to find a way to increase our revenue streams by reducing our lack of ability to collect services and fees for services we provide.
Even with no lights on. Amazing.
Yeah, so I'm Dave Sutton with Montway Auto Transport. So I'm going to talk about transportation challenges, and also I'm going to talk about the challenges our auction partners face. So it's so important to know accurate, reliable information. No transport carrier or broker wants to send the wrong equipment. We're working from the best information we have, but we need to have highly reliable information. You can't have dry run fees and be profitable. You've got to work well with your carriers and your drivers. Knowing, does it run, does it start, is it safe to operate, is it a road hazard? I mean, those are really, really critical. It's a safety issue. It's not just a money issue. And then the other is location access. These recovery lots, it's not all lined up like an auction on sale day. I mean, they have to make the best use of their space. You have to make appointments. They need to make the vehicles available to the transporters who show up. Appointments, yeah, would we love to just be able to show up, 24/7? That would be great. But, for reasons that Vaughn just illustrated, you do need to make appointments, so you need to be able to do that reliably. That becomes a greater challenge the longer distance there is that the vehicle's being moved. It's one thing if it's across town and it's a pickup where you could navigate that. But if it's 200-300 miles away, that's almost like a moonshot. And you're setting yourself up for potential problems if you have tight appointment windows. Communication's always an issue in every business, but when you look at the different players involved, the shipper, the driver, the dispatcher, forwarder, et cetera, it's a challenge. We already talked about accurate information. I mentioned about travel time, expectations. The recovery lots, Vaughn's talked about his constituents. These recovery lots are trying to serve many masters. So how do you do that and not shortchange yourselves? And then technology, there's different apps that are out there. There are different levels of adoption. And then amongst the recovery yards, you have a whole range. You have some that dominate the space. They have a great market share. But there are a lot of smaller, more mom and pop, smaller businesses. We got to figure out solutions to work with all of them. And then when it comes to inspections, your transportation inspections before the vehicle's moved, after the vehicle's moved, to have that synced up with all the other inspections of cars that are remarketed. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the auctions, because the auctions is kind of the last stop. So they need to know, depending upon, oftentimes the auction is given the responsibility to go get these units, and they'll do it with their own equipment or their own carriers, or work with brokers such as Montway or others. And so they need to determine, is the vehicle ready? Does it have keys? Does it require special equipment? And they need to be able to trust the information they get, whether they get it online through a system or talking with somebody. There's a lot of folks who are transportation managers, work within transportation departments within auctions, that they're doing the same thing the same way they did 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and 20 years ago. And they're insistent about making the calls. And so there's got to be some education and some updating of that sophistication. I'll talk about meeting commercial consignors, SLAs, or expectations, because many years ago, I used to be a consignor with Volkswagen Credit, and I made particular attention that when I looked at my metrics, I treated my lease returns very differently, and I had very, very high expectations. But when I looked at recovered units, you have to understand there's some new challenges. So if you're a commercial consignor, make sure you're segmenting what you're expecting from people regarding SLAs and pickup times, delivery times, and all the other, because it's just more complex. It's not like they're rolling into a Volkswagen dealership and picking up 5 cars and taking them to auction. It's a lot more challenging with recovered units. And for the auctions, they're trying to control their costs. Certainly they make money with buy fees and sell fees, et cetera. But for them to do dry runs, tie up their equipment, tie up their personnel, it's a very inefficient process. And it's kind of like they're the last ones at the end of the value chain. So oftentimes they are unfairly penalized, and that's not right. We got to fix that. And then when it comes to finding the right providers of transportation services, if you go to the low-cost bidder all the time, sometimes you're not going to like that result. So you got to balance that. They've got to have insurance. They have to have the right equipment. They have to have the right training. So it's fraught with some challenges. So that's just some high points that we talked about, and we're going to keep talking about it.
But wait, there's more. Technology. Jordan, please.
So anyone that knows me knows I'm kind of long-winded, so I tried to consolidate this the best I could into a couple of minutes. We see a lot of legacy technology issues in our space, and I'll kind of give an example of that and some software that we've created to help the post-recovery process. So 90% of all recovery agents are using a system called ClearPlan. That's what's putting the units in the barn, if you will. From ClearPlan, that information, recovery information, gets transferred into RDN. From RDN, the client gets notified. That information folds into a system called ClearData. That's a post-recovery agent management tool. It's very robust. It's task-driven. It has photos. Does the unit run? Does it have keys, et cetera, et cetera. Now, that is the most accurate form of record keeping that we see that we can give to lenders. But we couldn't realistically connect that to everything. So maybe a couple years ago, we created a product called Venlo. And really what Venlo is doing is it's taking all of that, it's a lot of information in that post-recovery software ClearData, but it's making it very easy to digest for the transport companies, auctions, lenders, or forwarders. And all it says is, does the unit run? Does the unit have keys? It shows pictures to make sure that they're going to send the right equipment to pick it up. And one of the best parts about it is it has an online calendar. So the agent doesn't have to take calls. The auction doesn't have to make calls. Everything is just done digitally. So you have this really, really cool product. It's on a dashboard. You key in your VIN. You can search it. Super duper easy. But one of the biggest problems we saw is we wanted to connect it via API with people. Now, we had a lot of success with a lot of companies connecting the API, but even with a lot of these legacy software issues with older systems, from the API connection, that data wouldn't flow upstream. So, coming from more of the agent side of the house, it was my priority to really try to smooth out the post-recovery process, because I feel like it's been broken for a really long time. But when you look at some of these post-recovery legacy software issues, we smoothed out the whole process, but unfortunately, due to legacy software issues, we weren't able to implement it with certain customers. So I could talk about this forever, by the way, and if you have any more questions on it, you can find me at any time this week, and I'd love to give you a better explanation.
Thanks, Jordan. So something happened, and that is that we still have time. We thought we might run out of time because we had so much to talk about. And we've been talking about this session for months. Renee and I stood here a year ago, and Bryan was in the audience with a question, a comment, a suggestion. So since we have some time, do we have microphones in the audience for anybody that wants to? We don't? Okay, that's cool.
Okay, so last year, it was the same room. It was kind of crazy we were talking about this. So Bryan was in the audience. I was in the audience sitting at one of the back tables there. And so I was, I've been around the industry for too long, but I was just listening to it and says, boy, all these problems, what are we going to do? Who's going to fix it? How's this going to happen? And so I ended up walking over to the table that Bryan was at. We had a few other people that had joined, and it really sparked some very constructive, positive conversation where I began to understand from the auto finance side. I'd been with Volkswagen Credit, but I was just a remarketing guy. I didn't even talk to the repo guys. I mean, that is a whole different department. So we were talking, some other transportation companies were talking, and it was a really great discussion. And so spontaneously last year, I just said, look, our company, Montway, we have a suite upstairs. Why don't we just continue the discussion? Who's got time to discuss this further? Let's not let this go. Let's work on it. So it worked out where Justin Zane from RDN came up, and we had a whole list. We had over 20 people in the suite. It was like 25, 26 people, and it was a wonderful discussion. And so we're going to do that again tomorrow morning. So if you're interested in participating, I'd ask that maybe one representative from your company, maybe two if you really got a lot to say. And the whole spirit and the intent of it is just to begin playing our cards face up. What are the challenges? What could you do differently? What are some thoughts for an honest exchange of information? It's agnostic regarding who the suppliers are in the different verticals. That doesn't really matter. But what does matter is that we work towards some solutions so we understand it. And we're going to record the session. If you don't like being recorded, don't come to the session. I'll ask you for your name, all your contact info, because afterwards we'll transcribe it, we'll produce a document, we'll send it out to everyone in the room. You'll have a chance to edit it, change it, update it, enhance it, and then we're going to create a knowledge state for the industry. And so what's different about it is not just for the recovery agents, it's just not for the transportation, it's going to go across. And so we're doing it because this group here and a lot of you out there, we want to work in a more efficient system. So this is an opportunity. So if this is something you want to do after the session, I'll just be over here. Come by. I'll give you the information, answer any questions you might have. I kind of hope that we're going to have around 20 to 30 people, not a lot more than that. So it can be a healthy discussion. But even if you want to be involved and get a copy of what was discussed, I'd be happy to share that with you because this is a service to the industry because we all want to make it better.
We really worked hard to put together something that a business vertical can look and learn more about the other verticals. That really seems to be one of the main problems, the bridge that we need. I know that in the transportation vertical, that's where my roots are, transportation doesn't understand the problems of repossession. Oftentimes, repossession actually understands transportation more. But then both of those groups, what their insight is into the finance, we didn't even talk about forwarders. We'll leave that there. That's for tomorrow. But the slide deck is available. Used Car Week after the show. Feel free to get a copy of that. The notes that Dave makes from the meeting that will happen tomorrow are amazing. So thank you, Dave, in advance for doing that. I have a copy of last year's. And this is all meant to help and keep the conversation going. I know I've seen packed rooms in repossession here at this show. This is obviously an important, passionate topic. That's what we're here to do, to give the macro view, to help connect. And the fact that we have GM Financial on the stage with us here today is awesome. So Renee, Bryan, Vaughn, Dave, Jordan, thank you so much for being a part of today's panel. Thanks everybody for joining us today.